I'm Christopher Ball. I'm a PhD candidate at Michigan State University in the Media and Information Studies program. And so basically I research technological impacts on society, particularly interactive media. So things like video games and virtual worlds and virtual and augmented reality in particular. So those are sort of where my specialties lie in terms of how are these new emerging technologies something that we can harness and leverage for research, education, and outreach purposes. VR essentially exists on one end of a spectrum, this real virtual sort of continuum, where we have reality on one end and then we have virtuality on the other. And VR is at the end of that, where it's a completely immersive experience in which you are immersed into a digital world and your actions are transmitted into that virtual world. While on the other hand, there's a spectrum in the middle of more mixed reality technologies. These mixed reality technologies include things like augmented reality, where it's not all the way virtual, it's not all digital. It uses elements from the real world and integrates digital objects within that real world environment. So it sort of exists on this spectrum where we can pinpoint where a technology lies, with VR being on one end and augmented reality existing somewhere in the middle. Augmented reality is when we augment our actual real world environment. So we're using the environment that we have around us, whether it's a table or a chair or a park, and we're overlaying digital information on top of it. So we're putting digital artifacts or digital objects into a real environment. So the environment is real, the setting is real, the objects or interactive elements are digital. So there's a combination of the real and the virtual, unlike something like virtual reality, which is totally virtual. My first contact with VR was actually when HTC, one of the big manufacturers of a well-received VR headset, was sort of demoing it around college campuses, giving academics and students a chance to try out the technology before it was fully on the market yet. And so I had signed up for one of those sessions and they ran me through a whole bunch of different experiences, very typical game-like experiences and what have you. And the first experience that really impacted me and made me want to start studying virtual reality and its potential implications was an underwater experience where you're on the deck of a ship and there's all these different fish swimming around you, and then you hear the distant call of a whale as it swims up, and you have a moment with a whale where it's looking at you, you're looking at it, you see just how big and majestic this creature is, and then it swims off. So the whole experience was only about 2 minutes, but I felt like I had just met a whale in just the span of 2 minutes. And that's something that I never thought I would be able to do. But with virtual reality, suddenly I had this experience. And so I immediately wondered if maybe other people would feel the same way. And I spoke with my colleagues that had done it, and all of them reported very similar sort of reactions to it. And so that really started me down the path of trying to figure out the best way that we can package and start communicating with experience rather than just words or pictures, when we can actually capture this element of immersion of these actual activities, or whether I'm diving to the bottom of the ocean or exploring the savannah in Africa. Suddenly all these new possibilities open up for what can we do, what can we experience through this technology. Journalism is an applied field of telling stories, conveying information that's actionable or understandable or enlightening to the community, keeping people abreast of what's happening. And I think virtual reality and augmented reality are new tools in that toolkit of a journalist to really impart understanding to an audience. So I don't think it necessarily needs to or should replace traditional forms of journalistic media like print or television, but instead I view it more as an addition to what's already there. Can we tell a better story using these technologies, or a new story or an old story in a new way, using this ability to immerse people in an experience? So rather than just describing an experience, or rather than taking a picture of an event, what happens when we can allow people to live that event themselves, maybe just a few minutes here and there. What's it like to be there and have that journalist perspective on what's happening in the world? I think that has a lot of powerful potential for how journalists communicate with the public, because now we have the potential to communicate via experience in ways that we just didn't have before. And journalists, I believe, should have a particular investment in figuring out how to use this technology the best to tell stories better. I think it's going to be a not necessarily like big name, big publisher, big budget sort of process right now, because journalism as a field moves very quickly, very rapidly. It has to adapt to new technologies very fast. And the news cycle itself is very quick. So it might take 6 months to a year to make a fully computer graphics oriented virtual experience. And that might be too long for journalism in particular. But there are much faster options in which I think virtual reality can suit the journalism business model, where instead of just having a photographer on the scene, have that photographer carry a 360 video camera, and suddenly you have a virtual reality element added to a story without requiring a whole bunch of extra effort or work on the part of the journalists or anything like that. So I see it as a new tool that can be added to a story where, okay, you've read about this, or you've seen this picture that's grabbed you, you watched this news story on television. Do you want to know more? Do you want to follow this trail a little bit further and take that next step to putting on the headset and being there with that journalist for that experience? So that's how I see it sort of fitting into the model right now, but of course that could change dramatically over time. Virtual reality is a very demanding media, and it's demanding in many different ways. There's right now a very high cost for entry for some of the higher level equipment. There's a cost in terms of the time it takes to set things up and get things working properly. So right now it is fairly demanding, but it's also demanding in terms of you're putting this headset on, you're blocking out reality. One of the things that I experienced as a parent with this technology is it's hard to block out reality when you have a kid running around. You don't want to take your eyes off your kids. So it's a very demanding media that requires all of your attention. And that's what some of my research has shown, that it's a very attention demanding media. So how it fits into our lives is something that we're still going to need to figure out. The spaces in which VR can be used effectively might change in terms of you need a whole room, or is it something you can do on the couch? So there's a lot of different things that we haven't quite figured out as a society where this is going to slot in necessarily, because we're used to consuming media in tandem or multitasking or checking our phone while watching a sitcom, and those sorts of things aren't as possible with VR. There are some ways we can do it where you can still get text message notifications in the headset or something like that. But in general, one of the concepts of virtual reality is being completely immersed. So it can be seen as a drawback at times in terms of requiring people to commit so much time, energy, money, effort into using it. But that could also be a strength in that now somebody is just focused on your story. There's no longer, we're blocking out those distractions that we've become very accustomed to, but they're distractions nevertheless. So this medium might give us a chance to really zero in and focus consumers on whatever experience what we've crafted for them. And that could have an important ramification for telling like journalistic stories or what have you. Well, I think there are tremendous ethical implications, and that's one of the reasons why I believe that we need to make sure that we are doing our research as we figure out how to harness this technology, because there are emotional reactions that people can have in VR, very quick, very severe reactions. And while there are plenty of positive responses that people can have to this wondrous technology, that door swings both ways. You can have a terrifying experience. You can have a life-altering experience in a negative way. The things that we talk about or discuss or report on are sometimes terrible, tragic events. And so there's an ethical caution to, do we want to drop people into these experiences? Do we want people to have that experience of a bombing or something terrible along those lines? It might increase empathy, but it also could do actual harm to somebody emotionally speaking. So we want to be sure that we tread lightly and we tread safely with and cautiously when we try to explore how we're going to use these technologies, because we don't want to end up doing undue harm accidentally, because the potential is there, but the power is there, and you don't want to overextend and end up having somebody leave your lab and then be affected and have sleepless nights for a week or something like that. And that possibility is there. So we need to be sure that the way we're using this technology is in a way that can lead to better understanding, better empathy, but not necessarily emotional distress or anything along those lines. So there's a lot of work we still have to do to figure out what kinds of stories are best suited for this particular medium. What kinds of things can we talk about that we can record in 360 or what have you that will be a value added to the work that's being done by journalists to help improve that understanding without necessarily putting people in harm's way with virtual reality until we really figure out how best to use this technology. It's still a relatively, the adoption of VR is still a new technology. So the adoption rate is still not very high. And it is predominantly with gamers right now because it's seen as an entertainment or gaming peripheral or platform at this moment in time. But if you look at the companies that are supporting virtual reality development, it's much broader. You see that it's not necessarily just games. When Facebook spent $2 billion to buy Oculus Rift, that's a fairly large economic statement about a belief in the future of this technology outside of just games. Oculus have invested a lot in games, but they're also investing a lot in how we can use this technology to stay connected with one another, to have feelings of social presence with people that we might not get to see as often as we would like. And so other companies are investing in leveraging the platform for training purposes. And even I have a background from Clemson University, and the Clemson University football team is using a virtual reality football training program. So there's a lot of applications and money outside of just the gaming aspect of things. And I think that that's a good sign that the industry realizes the potential is there beyond just entertainment platforms. And that entertainment platform is a great selling point. It's easy to make a commercial about the games. But once you have the games, maybe now you can call your grandma on your virtual reality headset. And that could be really important.
Is there anything else that I did not ask you?
If someone were to say VR is just a toy, I question whether they've really experienced VR as it exists today. There's definitely a novelty to it now, and there's an adoption trajectory that most of these sorts of technologies follow. And so there's a point where right now we're very excited about it, and that might balance out over time. We might settle into this technology and how it fits into our lives. But in terms of it just being a toy or just being for entertainment, that's not what we're seeing in terms of the experiences that are being designed and the types of projects people are conducting, where there's so many opportunities outside of just entertainment. But even just entertainment is an important aspect. The toy aspect could be that foot in the door that gets someone to try it for the first time and have that wow moment. I've run many participants through VR studies, and I would say about 90% of participants, their first reaction is just to utter wow. And so that's that moment where it kind of shifts from just being a toy to being something important or impactful. So it can be a toy at first, but then what else can we do with it? We can put one under the Christmas tree and get grandma to try it, and with just a fun experience. But then later, maybe it can be something used to help somebody understand a political change or a potential global crisis. So that might be a starting point, but I don't think that's where VR will end up, because we're seeing so many interesting projects that use VR for purposes outside of just entertainment or just fun, which are important in and of themselves. But we're seeing a lot more in terms of what can we do with this technology. A lot of times it's hard to convey what's special about VR via my words or via pictures or videos. because you can't quite capture this because we're working with a new dimension that we haven't really worked with before in terms of our media. So the best way to promote virtual reality is to try virtual reality. Most people, when they try it, they have that aha moment where it's like, okay, I see what all the fuss is about now. I see how this could be used for all these different things, or having this new level of immersion and experience that just wasn't possible before. So demo stations at stores like Best Buy or what have you, those are first steps. Just walking over and putting on a headset for 5 minutes could be enough. That was enough for me to be sold on this sort of technology. And people tend to become sort of evangelical about it after they've experienced it. It's like, you've got to try this. This is worth the hype that is surrounding it. But at the same time, the hype that exists around it now, the novelty that exists around it now won't be there forever. This technology will stabilize in an adoption trajectory at some point. And at that point, it might look a lot different than it looks right now. The reason people use it might be a lot different than it is now. So the gold rush that exists for VR right now is something that's very exciting, because that's when we're kind of laying the foundation for how we're going to use this technology. But at some point, that's going to calm down, and we'll have a much more realistic understanding of how it fits into our society. And so, as passionate as I am about that, as passionate as I am about the possibilities, there's definitely an understanding that at some point, when it becomes normalized, that it might not quite have the shine that it has right now. So we have to capitalize on this moment to show it to as many people as possible, get as many people involved as possible, and figure out how we want to use it. Because what we do now is going to determine how this technology is used 5 years from now or 10 years from now, and how we look back on it as a technology that really did change the way we tell stories, or as a flash in the pan of innovation that then led to other innovations. So we still have that ahead of us to figure out together. Well, the price has dropped substantially for buy-in to essentially virtual reality. So just in the span of a decade, the price has gone from $50,000 to as low as $1,000 for a fairly competent virtual reality computer and all the equipment necessary. So that's a big drop, but it's continuing to drop. And we're also seeing a lot of variation in different pricing models. So there's a lot of entry-level options, such as Google Cardboard, all the way up to something like the Oculus Go, where depending on how much money you have, how much you're willing to invest in VR, there's probably an option for you to get started. So even if you just have $20 in a smartphone, you can start with virtual reality. And there's a good bit we can do with just that, initial entry-level headset. But for the more high-end experiences, we're also seeing those prices drop pretty steadily. And as soon as next year, there's the capability for having fairly high-quality VR without the big expensive computer that's necessary right now to run it. So that self-contained package of VR and the rising quality but dropping costs means that it becomes a much more viable option for families. And that trajectory should continue, and hopefully that will increase adoption rates. So like was mentioned, entertainment might be that entry into VR. It might just be bought as a way to play video games, but that's the opening of that door. And through that door, we can start transmitting other kinds of experiences and other kinds of messages. So a purchase of virtual reality equipment might just be seen for entertainment purposes now, but in the next few years, as we figure out what we're going to do with it, it could be seen as a source of news or a source of social connection between people or between generations. The possibilities are quite endless right now for how we decide this technology will fit into our lives and how we're going to use it in our society.